So today we're going to continue on a series that we've been on, talking about some data-driven, assessment-based ways to improve your organization. We started out a couple of weeks ago talking about bridging performance gaps in your leadership team, talking about a critical alignment workshop. It's an assessment-based kind of data-driven team approach workshop that we use quite a bit with a lot of our clients. And we wanted to break some of these pieces down to look at individuals or look at specifics. For example, a manager direct report type relationship, ways that you could really get more of a deeper dive into really doing some engagement work with your organization. So today, our title is 2 ways to create a clear communication culture. 2 ways to create a clear communication culture. Because one of the biggest things that is a problem with most organizations, most teams, most places is communication. I like to talk about specifically in my business is all about leadership, communication, and engagement. And to me, that's a big deal. Is everything I do looks at one of those 3 things. But even though my Ph.D is in leadership, even though my leadership's in my company name, I always start with communication because it is the most important when it comes to organizations. What are your thoughts, Tom?
Dave, not only is communication important to the organizations we work with, it's important to global politics. It's important to families. It's important to every organization we can think of. Communication is the key area. Matter of fact, it's been reported billions of dollars are lost each year on miscommunication within just businesses and organizations. So the idea is when we're talking about ways to improve communication, this is a game changer.
Oh no, absolutely. And I one of the things that we talked about the last couple of episodes is when you can get together with your team, whether it's a board, a senior leadership team, or like a middle management team, and you can start to understand where people are coming from. You learn about their team, you learn about the way they communicate, their behavioral style. You look at what drives them, the why behind they do what they do. Like you said, you mentioned before, is like an iceberg. You see their behavioral style, their communication style, the how of what they do, little piece of it. The part that is the big is the iceberg that you can't see is the why behind what they do.
Yeah,
And
we
so
don't want
then,
to. We don't want our listeners to be on the Titanic here and just see the tip of the iceberg and unfortunately find out too late they've hit the part that's below the surface and it's caused all kinds of damage.
yeah, and we used an example before of somebody that you interview and she's great, and I mean just a star performer, just an absolute rock star, and a just perfect interview, works out great. And then 6 months later, you're like, well, what's going on? Well, in whatever maybe the drivers are, this kind of harmonious driver where it's more of a, you have to have, you got you've got a nice office, you've got a pleasant environment, you've got, the pictures, the plans, and stuff like that. You've got your physical environment is good. Plus, just that free of conflict from the whole area. Well, you get somebody like that and put them in a contentious situation and you've shoved them in a cubicle, even though the skills are the same, even though the job is the same, you look at just those environmental issues based on something that's a driver for them that they might not even be 100% consciously aware of. And then you wonder why 6 months later, hey, I thought this was the perfect person. Why are they not working out? They're not working out because of the environment that you put them in, because it directly conflicts with one of their, innate kind of driving forces, that's so important to them.
So true. So true, David. I think that's the key for our listeners today is to understand that communication is a multifaceted process. And the more we understand about how it works and how people operate, the better off we're all going to be.
Yes. And so the 2 ways that we wanted to talk about today about creating a clear communication culture was we wanted to specifically go to the report that we had referenced using in the critical alignment workshop, this Trimetrics DNA report that looks at behavior and communication style, driving forces, the why behind what you do, and then the competencies. There's 25 soft skill competencies, very specific in the report. And whether using ours, one like ours, or a different one of the things that I always want to make sure is when you're trying to talk to a team and you're trying to talk to, let's say, your direct reports, there's two ways to look at things. How would you like to be communicated with? Okay, that's a big one. So ways to communicate with Joe, with Sue, with Bill. And then probably the most important, even more important on how do I like to be communicated with, is a thing we call ways not to communicate with Bill, with Joe, with Sue, with Karen. And honestly, whether it's you're talking about from a leadership end of it or a communication end of it, when you've got a list of what to do and what not to do, I'm always a fan of the what not to do list is the more important list to look at, because if you can avoid the what not to do list in communication, that's going to be the stuff that shuts people down. Not, all right, I know what to do and I'm going to be more effective as a communicator if I do this. That's nice. That's good. Don't get me wrong. I'm not downplaying that at all. But the what not to do list. And I know you're going to give us some examples later, but if it's like whatever you do, do not be condescending, do not be demeaning, do not be whatever, they basically are like, it's a trigger list for lack of a better term.
Sure it is.
And when you come in there and you actually trigger somebody like that, it's not ineffective communication at that point. There's no communication. They're not listening to you. Now they're triggered, their emotions are high, the EQ comes into play. I mean, it's bad all the way around. Same thing with leadership.
You bet.
I'm looking at good leaders and bad leaders. What to do if I ever become in that position on, what good leaders I've seen in this particular position, what they did, and then what not to do. I'm still the same thing, just like with communication. The what not to do list is much more important.
Yeah, that's for sure. I remember just thinking years back, I had a client and unfortunately he had a divorce shortly after we started working together. And I ran into his wife at a networking session. And one of the things she said to me, which really stuck with me, because I knew she was right on the button with it, is that her ex-husband, never could admit when he was wrong. He was always right. So whenever they had a disagreement, her husband never, ever indicated that he might have been wrong or that she was right. So what I'm saying is that can go really deep in terms of putting a wedge in a relationship. And I'm talking about not just outside work, but at work as well. So.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's both ways. It's personal, it's professional, it's in a lot of ways.